We want your thoughts on this. Should life mean life for child killers? You can give us a call on 0207 862 2222. Colin Pitchfork is to face a fresh parole hearing after he challenged a decision to keep him in prison. Now, he was jailed for life for raping and strangling two 15-year-old girls, Dawn Ashworth and Linda Mann, in Leicestershire in the 1980s. Pitchfork was initially freed from prison in 2021, but was recalled after 2 months for approaching young women in the street. So do you think everyone deserves a second chance, or should those who kill children die behind bars? Matt, what do you think?
I think this is a really, really difficult thing to talk about. And I think front and centre should be Linda and Dawn, whose lives were taken so soon. So far too early, in horrific circumstances in the 1980s, and also with their families. And the second thing I think I'd like to say is that I completely understand the attitudes of their families. If they want this man to be kept behind bars forever, how could anyone begrudge them wanting that? And when a killer and a rapist, when his sentence comes up for review in the parole board, that must be a deeply traumatising thing for those families, because you can imagine how it brings everything back. So step away from that, but those the sort of essential things to bear in mind here. In principle, I've always been someone who believes in the power of redemption and in the possibility of rehabilitation. That doesn't mean to say it is always possible. But something inside me, even in these most grotesque of cases, says, should we extinguish all hope from a human life? And you can hear people sort of shouting at their TV saying, well, the families of these poor girls, they were stripped of hope. So why should the killer and the rapist have any hope? I just think there's something that we can perhaps as a society hold on to in our collective morality that says, give someone that chance. But I can understand very strongly why people would disagree.
So you wouldn't like to rule out the chance of rehabilitation. Wilfred, I think people do get quite surprised, even still today, when life doesn't actually mean life. I think when we hear that somebody's been handed a life sentence, we assume, well, they'll be in prison till they die, but it's not the case.
It isn't the case. What you've just said, I totally agree with you. And it's really difficult to debate this subject, because just reading the headlines then about these two young teenage girls, you know, the start of their lives, to be so savagely murdered. You want to chuck away the key. You want that person to suffer. But part of the measurement of our civilization, in a way, is actually saying, is it possible for some people to be redeemed? And I start from the principle that no one is born evil. So if you accept the premise that no one is born evil, what is it that has happened in that person's life that has enabled them to cross the line of their humanity? I want to find out about that. And I hope that those people who are worthy of redemption can be redeemed and also make a fantastic contribution to society. But I would accept some people will never, ever be redeemed. So the parole service has a very, very important job to get it right, because if they don't, you could imagine...
in the case of Colin Pitchfork here, we're talking about an individual that served nearly 30 years in prison, came out and still couldn't abide by the laws.
Well, that's
that were
been
set.
contested, and that's why he's appealing this decision to put him behind bars, because it's been suggested that he didn't actually do anything that he shouldn't have done. And I think it's important to emphasise here that this is about risk. So the decision here doesn't, as I understand it, revolve around the punitive element of his incarceration.
It's about his risk.
And I should be absolutely clear, if he is a risk, if the parole board deems that he is still a risk, of course he shouldn't come out.
And the other issue is the parole board, I suppose, and the lack of transparency around that and the mistakes that have been made in the past. That must be very worrying for people.
And who makes up these parole boards? I'm really interested in, you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what I mean. It's not very transparent. Joining us now is Alberto Costa, MP for South Leicestershire. Now, Alberto, you have been campaigning tirelessly to ensure that Colin Pitchfork remains in prison. What is your reason for that?
Well, firstly, good morning, Storm, and thanks for inviting me onto your excellent programme. This has been, as Matt said at the outset, this is a very sensitive case. And we should always have at the forefront of our minds Don Ashworth and Linda Mann, who, as you've mentioned, were brutally raped and strangled to death. Unlike Matt and Wilfred, as a Member of Parliament, I have to make decisions, I have to make the law. And in answer to your question, and it's a straightforward question, should life mean life for child killers? The answer that I would give your viewers is this: life should mean life for those that take the life of children or sexually motivated offences leading to the murder of women. And I'm glad to say that we, in fact, do look at these sorts of crimes differently from when we did when Pitchfork was first convicted. If you commit just one of the crimes that Pitchfork committed today, you're likely to get what's called a whole life tariff. And what that means is that whether you've been rehabilitated or not, as a society, you will be spending most, if not all, of your natural life behind bars. So we have actually moved on as a society. We view sexual offences leading to murder against women far more seriously than we ever did in the past. And so the law has been changed. Whole life tariffs now would apply to the types of crimes that Pitchfork committed. The other point I want to mention is this, Storm, that for those viewers that have seen the film The Shawshank Redemption, the character that Morgan Freeman played was somebody who in his youth had committed an awful crime. We never found out what the crime was. But I think most people that viewed that film recognised that an effective parole board system is that when somebody is elderly and definitively no longer poses a threat to society, it is right that that person should be released. Colin Pitchfork is not in that category. He went into prison as a mature man of 28, and he was released from prison as a middle-aged man of working age at 61. I think most people, most viewers instinctively know that there's something wrong if you can rape and strangle to death 2 women and be released from prison at working age. There's something not right. And that's why I've been campaigning assiduously over the last 5-6 years to keep Pitchfork where he deserves to be, behind bars.
What age do you think would be right then for him
to be released?
Well, Wilfred, that's a good question. And as I say, you know, I hope you've watched the film The Shawshank Redemption.
Film. It's one of my favourite films.
It's a great film. Look, the character that Morgan Freeman plays is portrayed as an elderly man. And he'd been refused parole umpteen times until he was clearly fully rehabilitated and secondly and importantly presented absolutely no danger to the public. I think in the case of Pitchfork and other like it, if Pitchfork was in his late 70s, early 80s, or was suffering from a terminal illness, I think compassionately we would say, well, if he's suffering from a terminal illness and has only got weeks or months to live, or is an elderly man and really does not pose a threat to society, then he should be released.
Okay.
But only 2 months ago, Storm, the parole board ruled against Pitchfork because he could not evidence that his attitude towards women had changed. So he clearly does continue to present a danger to the public.
Or it might be quite a difficult thing, having been in prison for nearly 30 years, to prove. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of what sort of evidence he would need for that. Joan from Cheshire, stay with us, Alberto. We're just going to take a few calls now. Joan from Cheshire, what's your thoughts on this? Should those that kill children die in prison?
Definitely.
Is there not a case for rehabilitation here? Some people have very traumatic childhoods that lead them to severe mental illnesses that make them do things that they wouldn't have done had they been given the care that they needed. And maybe we need to have a slightly more broader view.
Well, for me, I definitely would not let them out. I wouldn't take the risk on an innocent child's life.
So you think that regardless of somebody like Colin Pitchfork's age or whether he's got a terminal illness, as Alberto says, you think regardless of any of that situation, you should keep them in prison, they should die in jail?
I agree. Die in jail.
What do you think to that, Matt?
I think almost without question, the majority of our viewers today will agree with her. I think I totally understand. No nonsense. It was interesting that Alberto brought up the Shawshank Redemption, because for me, the message of that film was about hope. The absolute it is intrinsic to our humanity that we have hope. And so denying even the worst of us, and there's no denying that this man has done evil things, but denying even the worst of us hope, I think perhaps undermines us as a society. Now, people will be, again, shouting at the TV, who is this liberal, get him off, wishy-washy. But actually, even the families of some...
He deprived 2 young girls of their life, and you don't even want to deprive him of hope.
That's my starting point, to remember these victims, to remember Linda and to remember Dawn, and to bear in mind the ongoing suffering of their families. But even the families of some victims, we know this, when they are capable, and I'm not lecturing anyone, but when they have shown us that they are capable of forgiveness, they themselves feel lighter, that they could go about their lives without that.
Forgiveness is something you do for yourself, but it's not something you do for the other individual. Joan, thank you for your call. Phil from Birmingham, how do you feel about this? I mean, it's a very emotional question. Oh, Phil, we'll try and get you back. I think we've just lost connection.
I think it's no longer about the person that's committed the crime. This is a question about us as a society. For example, capital punishment is one of those big sort of debates. So, when I see the societies that they're still doing capital punishment, I just think they're really behind in terms of human development. And part of us understanding the human condition is, what do we do when we have these extremes? What are the decisions we make? And it's easy to sort of throw away the problem, lock the key, and then think that's going to deal with it. But we've got to try and learn and understand these sort of things, because that's how we're going to improve as a society.
Diane from Northumberland, what's your thoughts?
They should put him in prison and throw the key away.
But I suppose part of our judicial system, part of prison is punitive. It's a punishment, absolutely. So that would be the case of chucking them and throwing the key away. But the other half is rehabilitation. So we've got an option. We have a very horrible human being who doesn't function in society and is unsafe to have them in society. So we either pay for them for the rest of their life to stay in prison and behind bars, or we try and rehabilitate them so that they can understand the devastation that their crimes have caused. They can understand, how to behave in society and be a functioning part of it. And is that not what we try to do with all criminals?
Well, would you like these people living next door to you with your grandchildren or your children?
That's a very good question. Wilfred, how would you feel about that if Colin Pitchfork got out tomorrow and set up right next to you?
What I wouldn't want is someone that's come out of prison that hasn't actually redeemed themselves living next door to me.
But hold on, no, the Parole Board have decided that Colin is no longer a threat to society. He has rehabilitated as far as the Parole Board are concerned. Let's bear in mind that the Parole Board has made mistakes in the past. Are you happy with them moving in next to you?
Yes, I'm happy. If it's deemed that this person... Because I cannot stand here and have a conviction about actually redemption and then say, well, I'm prepared to redeem them, but I don't want them living next door to me. That would be sort of hypocritical. If you believe in redemption, which I fundamentally do, I think, therefore...
It's not just about redemption, it's about rehabilitation. Yeah. Now, that is a very difficult thing for a parole board who are populated by human beings. We were asking earlier, Storm, who they are, these people. It is a bit opaque. They are human beings. They can get it wrong. And I do understand the immense pressure that these people rightly feel to get it correct. Because if they get it wrong, and someone of this sort of personality or someone of this history of extreme sexual violence commits another crime, heaven forfend. And you can understand why MPs are very concerned about this. And I should just add, because this is really important, that the government is trying, I'm no fan of the government, but they are trying to change the law to make sure that for the worst killers, life does mean life.
And things have changed. Colin Pitchfork was convicted in the 80s, though things were different. Alberto, talk to me a little bit about the community and how the community is feeling about this situation.
Well, it's very raw. I've been the MP for South Leicestershire for 9 years. And I've lost count, Storm, of the number of women of about my age. I'm 53 this year, and Dawn and Linda would be roughly in their early 50s. I've lost count of the number of women that come up to me and say, Mr. Costa, keep going with your campaign. I was at school with Dawn or with Linda, or we live nearby in Enderby, Narborough, or we walk our dogs near the areas where these appalling crimes were committed. Even though there's been a passage of time, what I've learned is that time of itself doesn't actually heal the family, friends of the victims, even people, acquaintances of the local community. It's a very raw issue in South Leicestershire. People haven't forgotten these crimes. It's very raw, and that's why actually today I've issued this survey across 30,000 plus households across South Leicestershire, asking for people's views on parole board reform. And you, Storm, I think, hit the nail, the head of the nail. You said that part of our judicial system is that it offers a punitive sanction against somebody convicted. But you also earlier said that there's a lack of transparency in the parole board system. What we have that's odd is that all of us can hear a case against somebody that's charged of a criminal offence, because a criminal court is an open forum. The media can report on it. Members of the public can attend court hearings. Yet at the end of the criminal justice period, when somebody's seeking to be released on licence, and remember, it's always on licence for these types of crimes, it's all opaque. There's a total lack of transparency with the parole board system. And that's one of the principal reasons I've been fighting so hard to get much more transparency. And Matt also used the word opaque, as I say. So I think we can probably all agree, regardless of the principles involved in the Pitchfork case, I think we can all agree that the parole board itself lacks transparency and needs a more open process.
Yeah, the
So
parole
we can all
board would
determine
be
what the evidence is.
the parole board in that situation would be a whole other debate for another day. I just want to squeeze in one last call. Francis from London, what's your thoughts when it comes to people who have killed children? Should they die behind bars?
I think it's a horrific crime, and like I do agree with the gentleman before that, when people are born, when children are born into the world, they're not evil. They're not born evil. They learn this behaviour, and they learn this behaviour through other people, through other people that are raising them and in their environment. And I do believe that this is learnt behaviour. It can also be unlearnt, and
case, Francis,
we need to give them a chance to do that.
Do you think that's true in every case?
I don't know. I think every case is individual. But if we are saying life means life for child killers, then you are making that as a one.
Okay, I'll put a question that our previous caller put to us on the panel. Would you be happy with someone like Colin Pitchfork moving in next to you? He's in his 60s now. The parole board have said that he's completely rehabilitated. I am making this up now. And he's moved in next to you. How comfortable do you feel?
To be fair, at the present moment, the way the prison systems are, I would not be happy with that. There has to be a complete relook at rehabilitation, because you can't stick somebody in a cell, lock the key, and just expect them to rehabilitate themselves.
Well,
they have learned behaviour.
If Francis, if they were going to die behind bars, we wouldn't need them to rehabilitate.
But why wouldn't you want them to? Why wouldn't you give a person a chance to rehabilitate, to unlearn that behaviour? Because that behaviour normally comes from trauma. If you look at our prison systems, they are filled with people with PTSD and trauma from childhood.
Yeah,
nobody's
Francis,
really looking into this.
Thankfully, our prisons aren't filled with people who have killed children and committed crimes as hideous as this. But I hear what you're saying. You're saying everything needs to be in a case-by-case basis, and I suppose that is what the judicial system tries to do.
I haven't changed my mind, but I did think what Alberto said was very powerful, that effectively it's not just the prisoner, the criminal who lives on and who can change, we hope, and be redeemed and rehabilitated. The crimes themselves live on in communities. And of course they live on in in the hearts of the parents and the siblings. And if you think about the mid-80s, I was like 6 or 7. If that sort of crime had happened in my area, it would still be a live thing.
And clearly in your area, Alberto, it is. Thank you, Francis, for your call. Thank you, Alberto Costa, for joining us for that discussion there. We're going to have to move on after the break. Should